You got Mac and Mac here with you on Birds 365. We've got Johnny Marks going to join us in hour number 2. We'll talk to JM a little bit down the road. But I teed up this question for you, John, and I thought of it mainly because of the Hassan Reddick trade that the Eagles made and the fact that they were ready to move on from their best defensive player because of contract situation and age. There were surely several factors that contributed to the Eagles' decision to not pay Hassan Reddick what it take to get him signed to a contract extension here. And I suggested that maybe they should have just attempted to keep him for 1 year and let him do exactly what Javon Hargrave had done the year before. Get him in here, get him to sing for his supper, and maybe get a phenomenal year out of him. And then even if he walks away and you can't get him re-signed thereafter, you get an immediate third-round draft pick rather than wait on a third-round draft pick that you're not going to get the Jets from 2 years. But the reason why, probably the biggest reason why, was they didn't necessarily want the guy who wasn't happy by being a Philadelphia Eagles still being here and the like. Well, I think that's kind of the coach's job. That's what you're paid to deal with. You're paid to deal to take a player who might not be the happiest he could be in your locker room and make sure that you keep him focused and you keep him as at least on task as much as possible. And the fact that they decided, yeah, we don't know that Sirianni can do something like that doesn't speak well for Sirianni for me going forward. I was certainly in the camp of I didn't think Sirianni deserved to be fired. A lot of people weren't. They were ready to move on from the coach and scrap the whole thing after the collapse and start anew and get a whole new coaching staff and a new head coach in here. I was not necessarily that guy. But with what has transpired since and the way that certain hirings have gone down and decisions have been made, I don't know that Nick Sirianni is more than a 1 year holdover for this job. I went through the teams in the National Football League, John, and said, who is a better chance to be the head coach of their football team in 2025, Team A or the Eagles? And compared the teams to the Philadelphia Eagles, he's not in the top half. I'm not sure he's in the top quarter.
No, not at all. I mean, if you look, and I haven't nobody sent me the betting odds recently, or if I did, I've been so immersed in something else this week. But, he's always in the top 5 as first coach to be fired this season with the betting odds, which doesn't mean anything. It's not, a death sentence by any sense. If they win games and the Eagles still have a talented roster, it'll be fine. That part of it isn't in the equation. But yeah, to the people outside the NovaCare complex, he looks like a lame duck. I've been asking that about people, our guests, for a number of weeks. And if things go poorly, I don't think there's any doubt he's not coming back. So it's gotten very important for Nick Sirianni to look at. We talk about the immediacy that Howie Roseman doesn't have to deal with. Well, Nick does have to deal with.
Yeah.
And he's in a different category, no question about it. And they got to win football games, and then it'll be fine. But from the standpoint of Hassan Reddick, I'm not going to kill him for that. That's not on Nick Sirianni. That's how
No. I'm saying it puts more pressure on Nick Sirianni because they made the call, and I don't know. I haven't talked to Howie about it. He's not sharing his mindset with me, but I think I can read between the lines a little bit. And that if he had a coach that was in complete control of the locker room and it had the respect of every single player in there, and they all believed wholeheartedly in him, I think he might have been able to keep Hassan Reddick and say, listen, we're asking you to handle it.
Well, then I think you should point the finger at Jeffrey Lurie, because I think he had that coach, and I think Jeffrey Lurie created the environment where he no longer has that coach. I think, the connection part, and Nick goes through his football beliefs too often, but his core beliefs. But the first one is connection, and he does connect well with people. I don't think
Do
there's
you
any.
think he couldn't have connected with Hassan to get him to
I
play
think
on
he
the last
already
year of his
did.
contract?
I think he already did, but I think that's out of his purview. You're talking about NFL players, and I've talked to a lot of them, you know, I mean, the money part of it is important to them. And from not only the obvious perspective, you want to make as much money as possible in a short shelf life, but from a respect factor. So I think if you talk to Hassan Reddick today, he would only have glowing things to say about Nick Sirianni. Is he happy about other people in the organization? No. And as I said, you can't. I don't know. I think you and I differ on this a little bit, and correct me if I'm wrong. You can't expect Hassan Reddick to come here and play for the Philadelphia Eagles again, getting less money than Bryce Huff. That has nothing to do with Nick Sirianni. That is Howie Roseman's job. And I think Howie again did what he did with the defensive backs last year. Once he got Bryce Huff, it became a 3, and we're going to keep 2. And then all of a sudden, both Hassan Reddick and Josh Sweat were given the opportunity to seek potential trades and look elsewhere. And Josh Sweat was the one who agreed to the contract quicker. And it was a more obviously, it's much more complicated with Hassan Reddick because you're talking about 20 million plus, most likely. And at that point, the door was shut. And that, again, you can argue how much they should go, how high they would go, but they always had to go higher than Bryce Huff. There was no way, not in a million years, he was playing for this team. He might play for the Jets.
Despite the great connection that you're telling me he had with Nick Sirianni.
Man, you don't, the money has nothing to do with respect or like or disrespect for Nick Sirianni. That is, in his mind, it is disrespect from the Philadelphia Eagles to ask him to play for less than Bryce Huff. And I agree with him wholeheartedly, by the way. That is nothing to do with Nick Sirianni. That is all Howie Roseman.
Right.
All
and,
Howie
and
Roseman.
I think people, because a couple of guys here on the stream and or gals are taking a shot at me saying Jody's always looking at the negative. Yeah, I disagree. I think it was a bad trade by the Philadelphia Eagles. I'm not a cheerleader. I don't get paid by the Philadelphia Eagles. I'm going to give you my honest opinion on them. When they're great, I'm going to tell you they're great. When I think they've made a mistake, I'm going to tell you they made a mistake. And maybe you're misinterpreting what I'm saying here. Yeah, it's the Eagles. It was Howie Roseman, and probably with the approval thereof of Jeff Lurie, that made the decision that, in my estimation, John thinks it's impossible. I used as an example yesterday Javon Hargrave. He came in last year of his contract, same situation, signed as a free agent, looking at his third deal. The number got to a point where the Eagles said, yeah, we're not going to be able to meet that. What he's done on the open market, we're not going to be able to pay it. What we think he's going to get when he gets to the open market, we're not going to be willing to do. And he played his final year here, and then he went free agent. And I think the Eagles could have asked Hassan Reddick to do that. However, if you're going to do that, you need to have faith that the coach and his staff are going to be able to get the most out of the player. And I think that the Eagles showed their evaluation of Nick Sirianni by saying, yeah, we don't have this in place. This could get out of hand. This could get out of control. It's better for us to take 60 cents on the dollar and just move on and get rid of Hassan Reddick than ask the coach to be able to handle a difficult situation in the locker room. That's a point I would try to make. I guess it's a quasi shot at Sirianni because I think he's in a bad place right now. I'm a guy who defended him and said he should have kept his job. But with the other moves that have been made around him, I think he's in even a lesser place. And I think the Eagles tipped their hand by showing you that they were willing to move off Hassan Reddick, who is their best defensive player.
Well,
the most they can get in exchange for him is a future third-round draft pick.
They certainly were willing to move off him, and they indicated that they wanted the younger body. And again, it's all about projection and We'll see if they're right on Bryce Huff. And they also wanted Nolan Smith to get more involved, which is very questionable. And people are fair to question. I don't like the Hargrave comparison at all from the perspective of, I'm not saying you can't play on a walk year. Guys do it every year. It happens every year in the NFL. And a lot of times it's a motivational tool because they know they're going to hit the open market. And Javon ended up having a great year and getting a great contract. And the Eagles knew they weren't keeping him. I'm not saying because he's not going to play on his walk year. I'm saying because of the situation where they brought in a player at the same position and paid him more money than a guy who produced. If the Eagles did that with Javon Hargrave, first of all, they would have done the same thing. They would have traded him because they wouldn't have paid two guys that level of money, but they didn't do that. So the Huff thing is where it all comes to. If you don't sign Bryce Huff, you could bring Hassan Reddick back. He might be upset. He might, but he's a professional, just like he did last year. He'd play out the final year of his deal. He's not going to hold out. He's not going to sit out the season. So that's why I don't like that comparison. They brought in a player at the same position, making more money. So I don't like that comparison at all. If Bryce Huff, if they didn't sign Bryce Huff, yeah, then you can bring him back and say, we love you, Hassan. But you got to play your final year of your deal. Then we'll talk about it. And then it's Nick Sirianni's responsibility. And I think Nick would have handled that perfectly. I think you're missing the point of the guy coming in making more than the guy who produced for you over the past two seasons.
Well, yeah, I don't get your point. Or I just don't agree with it. I think that you could have asked Hassan Reddick to come back and say, we're going to rotate defensive ends. We always rotate defensive ends. We're going to use you less than we did last year because we used you too much last year. We asked you to do too much last year. We're not going to ask you to do as much this year, but it's your job starting defensive end. Would you rather have Josh Huff or would you rather have Hassan Reddick? They had made the move already to get Reddick back into the fold.
Well, they said they'd rather have Bryce. So you're telling me that you're going to pay Bryce Huff $17 million a year and you're not going to start him?
I'm going to start the better player, which I believe is Hassan Reddick.
To me, Jody, you're completely ignoring the contract part of this, which is unrealistic. I get your point of a vacuum. It'd be great if the world were like that, but it's unrealistic. If you pay a guy that money, and again, you can criticize the Eagles all you want. I'll get in line with you. If you want to say Bryce Huff can't play, if you want to say Nolan Smith can't play, those are legitimate arguments to me, and they made wrong evaluations. But if you're going to ignore the contracts and say, oh, just play, and just this guy coming in for $17 million.
Here's the reason why, John. How much did they save under the cap by trading Hassan Reddick?
$1.3 million.
So I'm going to weigh $1.3 million against having Hassan Reddick in my defensive end mix. That's the part of the contract I'm looking at.
I'm talking about the player's perspective. The player's perspective was already unhappy, already made a mistake, and he should blame Tory Dandy, his agent, who should have held in coming off the Super Bowl season. I mean, money's important to these guys. My old buddy Barrett Brooks, you know, if you're a Goodfellas fan, there's a great scene where they bust out the restaurant and they take the guy and they're talking, and he's saying, "Oh, we had a bad business week. Fuck you, pay me." That's NFL players. F you, pay me. And the fact that you don't think that players take that into account and you're putting that on the head coach of the football team, you don't go out and pay a guy who on projection. It's pure projection. And hopefully Bryce Huff, from the Eagles' perspective, turns into a great pass rusher, because if he doesn't, they're going to get really criticized on the back end of this thing. But if you don't think going out and paying a guy on projection $17 million and you won't give Hassan Reddick a bump, I think even the Eagles, by the way, I'm not even going to blame Howie Roseman. I'm sure he was talking about Hassan Reddick and say, we'll bump you up to 18 million. We'll bump you up to 19 million to get you above Bryce Huff, because he's not a moron. He was certainly talking that. Hassan wanted 25 million. Let's be honest. And the Eagles, that's the conversation we're missing on. He wanted to be top of the line edge rusher of the NFL, top 5 edge rusher in the NFL. Probably deserves it. Should have pushed for that. Has been that performance. And it's that point where the Eagles say, well, we can't give you that. We can give you this. And that's where the wrangling, and they couldn't come together. Howie Roseman never expected Hassan Reddick to come back to play for the Philadelphia Eagles at $14.5 million a year after he signed Bryce Huff. He's not a moron. He's trying to get something done. And then at that point, he said, you know what? We're going to try to toe the line. We're going to try to get younger. We're going to project this guy's going to be a really good player. We still like Nolan Smith. And again, you can criticize that because Nolan Smith didn't show anything last year. Hopefully he's healthier. Hopefully he gains some weight. He gets stronger. He's in the weight room, and maybe he takes off. And that's the key to it all, the projection. But the Eagles never.
The key to it all will be the production. Right now, it's the projection. We'll judge it off the production once the years.
The trick is not to pay a guy for what he did, but to pay a guy for what he's going to do.
Right. And neither one of them is given. A projection is just that. It's a projection. You don't know. It is not a foregone conclusion. They are projecting that Huff is going to get even better than he was with the Jets, because I believe what Hassan Reddick did here was better than what Bryce Huff did for the Jets. So you don't know either way. You're as you say, if you pay for what somebody's already done and then they don't reproduce that, yeah, you look stupid. But if you have a projection and you're projecting a guy to improve and get back to the level, just to the level of the guy that you let walk out the door or trade for a future third-round draft pick, yeah, that could be just as wrong. It's not a given to get it right either way.
You could draft Jalen Reagor instead of Justin Jefferson. Projection ain't easy, but that's the trick to it all. But if Hassan Reddick agreed to play for $18 million this season, he'd be back with the Philadelphia Eagles. If he said right away,
maybe
he'd be back with the Philadelphia Eagles.
We don't know that. You're probably right, but not 100%. I don't know what Hassan's ask number was. I don't know what the Eagles' top offer was. And the fact that they haven't had a deal done between the Jets and the Hassan and his agent, I think does tell you something that we might not have a good grasp on yet what either side was asking, whether Hassan's ask number was outrageous or whether the Eagles
I don't think 25 I don't think 25 million is outrageous. I'd ask for 25 million if I were Hassan Reddick. I don't think it's outrageous by any stretch of the imagination asking for that.
So if you think the ask of 25 million was right, then you think the Eagles' offer of 18 was lowball.
Oh yeah, there's no question it's lowball.
Well, that's where on that we will agree. I think the Eagles mishandled the negotiation. And
I don't think it's a mishandle. I think they said we ran this guy into the ground. It's the ugly part of the industry. 900 over 900 snaps, 2 consecutive years. They ran him into the ground, and they're projecting the descent to begin shortly. Even if it's not the old adage, better give up on a player a year early than a year late. And they set a bar. We'll go here, and we're not going above this bar. And they couldn't come to conclude the whole idea And we talked to Randy Mueller about this. The whole idea when you give people permission to go out and look at the market, you're trying to say, we're not the bad guys. Go see, go look. And it's a calculated gamble. From that perspective, we'll see if he gets a new deal from the Jets, and then you'll get a better feel for what the actual market is. But the Eagles took that calculated gamble, and they took it with 2 players. And they said the first one to come back, we'll keep, essentially is what they did. And that's what happened.
No, and I think they ended up keeping the lesser of the 2, but that's just my evaluation of Josh Sweat and Hassan Reddick. He's McMullen on McDonald. We still got an hour to go. Johnny Marks going to join us in less than 20 minutes here on Birds 365.